Hey guys, and welcome back to another 9.1 preparation video. Today we're going to be talking about the Shards of Domination. So if you've watched my most recent 9.1 prep video, where I talk about new gear, you'll know that there are certain pieces of gear that drop from bosses in the raid that have these really weird sockets on them, right? They're called domination sockets. And these sockets are different from any other sockets in the game. So, like the ones that you can put on your gear through Venari are different from these. And the ones that randomly get applied to your gear when it drops are also different from these. So, you can't put like a 16 mastery gem into one of these domination sockets. They take a specific kind of gem, which is called a Shard of Domination, right? And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So, I'm just going to go through all of the different shards, and then I'll talk about the quote-unquote set bonuses at the end, where if you have three of a same kind of shard, it gives you some bonus, right? And I'll comment on what I think is going to be worth going for, and what I think is not something that is going to benefit us at all, right? So, first things first, I want to say that the way you get these shards of domination is not clear. So there hasn't been anything where they're like, oh, so this shard, this blood shard, drops from this boss. There's none of that. The shards aren't in the raid loot table as far as I can see. So not entirely sure where these shards come from. I'm recording this video on June 17th. And they just announced that the new patch is going to drop on June 29th, so in like 12 days. So I'm betting that they're going to clear up a lot of this confusion here in the next couple days, which is why I'm making this video now, because we got to get in go time mode, right? There's not a whole lot of time before the new patch drops, and so we all want to get prepared as soon as possible. So if they clarify in the coming days about where these shards drop from, I'll go ahead and either make a new video, or maybe I'll just edit this one and put like something in the comments, a pinned comment or something where I say, hey, go check out this new video where I talk about this, or I just give you the info in the comment. So if you're watching this video in the future, not close to when I publish it, check the comments and see if maybe things have changed and what I'm saying now is no longer true, right? So because we don't know where they drop, these things might be something that are really easy to get, and they might also be something that are really hard to get, right? So if they're super easy to get, then it's not a big deal, right? You can just get all of them, and maybe they're so easy to get that you passively get all of them, right? You're not even trying to get shards, and they just so happen to drop for you. And if that's the case, then that's going to be really nice, because then the one that's best for you, you'll probably already have, or it won't be hard to get, right? But if they're hard to get, like maybe they only drop from, this would be ridiculous, but maybe they only drop from like plus 20 dungeons, right? Or something like that. Again, there's no evidence that that's how it's going to be, but if that is the case, or something similar, like you have to spend a lot of a certain currency to buy them or something, where it takes like a long grind. If that's the case, then it's very important that you get started early and you know where your best shard comes from, right? So that you can start farming it as soon as possible. And that's, again, part of the reason why I wanted to make this video. So let's go ahead and start looking at the different shards. So first, we've got this Shard of Beck. And you can upgrade all of these shards up to the 5th rank. So there are 5 different ranks, and I'll mention real quick before we go too far into this. You upgrade these by getting a currency called Stygian Embers from different bosses in the raid. So it's going to mean that, well, okay, so I won't go too much into the implications of that, but basically, if your guild is like a heroic only guild, and you just try to get AOTC by the end of the tier, and then you're good. If that's you, then there's going to be an incentive for you to clear the raid on normal. Because if you're trying to upgrade your shards so that you can do as much damage as possible, um, and you only get these Stygian Embers from bosses in the raid, then you're going to want to clear as far as you can in heroic, but then you're also going to want to go back into normal and clear the whole raid if you can, and maybe get more Stygian Embers so that you can upgrade your shards, right? So just keep in mind that you might have to, if you're really trying to min-max, if you're like at the higher end of raiding, you might have to do 3 different raids a week, right? You might have to clear all of Mythic, all of Heroic, and all of Normal, right? To try and get these Stygian Embers. And even if they drop from LFR bosses, I could see some really nutty, like people forming groups to queue for LFR so that they can get more chances at these Stygian Embers. So hopefully it's not that degenerate where you're like farming 4 different raids every single week, because that would be a lot of time. Okay, so now let's just get right into the shards. So this first one is the Shard of Beck, is what it's called. And there should be a graphic up right now that has them. And the different ranks, basically what this one does is your damage is increased by 2% when you have 50% or more health than your target. So this is like, the wording is a little weird, but basically it's like, if your target has 10,000 health, then you have to have 15,000 health or more to get this increase, right? So basically you take 50% of the current health of your target, and you add that onto its current health, and if you have more health than that, you get this buff, right? So this one is not bad. It's just a straight % damage increase, which is nice, right? Like a 3 DPS, 3% DPS increase from the 5th rank of this. I would take a 3% DPS increase any day, right? That's a pretty big increase. So this one is not horrible. The only way that this is bad is if you're ever fighting something that has way more health than you for a long period of time, right? So, for instance, any raid boss, right? This is probably not going to be very good in the raid, because let's say when you're fully decked out in your heroic gear, you've got 55, 60,000 HP, something like that. The Terragru, the first boss in the raid, has like 70 million or something, right? So, for that boss to get to the point where you get this buff, the boss is basically dead, right? So it's not going to be useful in the raid, except for if there are like, I don't know, if there are like specific ads that need to die, maybe this could give you some damage increase against them. There is a bit of vagueness here. It says your damage is increased by 2% when you have 50% or more health than your target. Does that mean your damage to that target specifically, or all of your damage? Because if it's all of your damage, and it's more similar to like First Strike from Karain, then if it's all of your damage, then this could be really good on bosses that like Kel'Thuzad, that have a lot of ads and they die frequently. So you could have like pretty much a really high uptime of this buff where it's like more than 80% of the fight you're doing 3% increased damage. If that's the case, then this could be pretty good on those kind of fights. But as of right now, I'm gonna assume that this is just saying your damage is increased by that much to that target. And if that is the case, then this is pretty much useless on any raid boss. But if the other thing turns out to be true, where your damage is increased by that much on all targets when your current target has, when you've got more health than your current target, then this, like I said, could be good on certain raid bosses. And the place where this is really going to be good, regardless of how it works, is in Mythic Plus, right? So in Mythic Plus, this kind of situation happens very frequently, where you're fighting something and it's got 30k HP and you've got 55 or something, right? You're well over this this threshold to get this buff, and as stuff starts dying, this buff will you'll have more uptime of this buff, right? As stuff gets less health, this buff is more frequent. So that's the first one, Shard of Beck. I would say not something that you are gonna be like trying to get big time. It's not like, wow, this is super good, we have to go get this right now. But it is probably, because it's a damage one, it is probably one that you want to have, right? So if it turns out that it's hard to get these, maybe this isn't the first one that you go for. But if it turns out that it's pretty easy to get these, I would definitely pick this one up, during your weekly chores or whatever. The next one, this is a healing shard. It's called Shard of Jazz, or maybe Jas or Yas, something like that. And this one is pretty much a tank shard, so I'm not going to go too much into it. It increases the healing you get by, a percentage. From the current tooltip says 1.1 to 1.5%. And this last part where it says your maximum health is increased by 2, that's obviously not the final number, right? It's going to be some other number that is actually meaningful. And depending on what that number ends up being, like if it's 2k or something, that's not a lot. But if it's 200k, right, which it won't be, but that would be enough that it's something you would take, right? But the only way I could see a Shadow Priest ever using this is if there are like not enough really good ones, and we just need like a utility shard to add to our gear, because you can socket up to 5 things, right? You'll be able to have 5 shards at a time. So maybe there's only 3 that are really impactful, and then the last 2 are kind of like meh, who really cares? This is one that you would definitely want because it's survivability, right? And Shadow Priest specifically has a lot of self-healing. So that's part of the reason why we're so tanky. Like half of your Devouring Plague damage heals you, and your Vampiric Touch heals you. So this one could maybe be like your 4th or 5th shard that you go for, if you're going for like the blood set bonus or something. But it's definitely not going to be one of your primary shards. So don't be, trying super hard to get it. But if you do get it, pretty nice. And this is another one that you might want to have if you plan on playing Disc or Holy as well as Shadow, because healing is really nice to have, right? So this is mostly a tank shard. Like tanks would want this, and Priest doesn't have a tank spec, so probably don't want this too much. But that's what I think of this one. And then the third blood shard is called the Shard of Rev. So this one, the tooltip is just completely bugged, but it just increases your leech by a certain amount, right? Right now it just says 0 on everything, but I imagine it's going to be some number that increases as you increase the rank, right? Again, this is a big time healer shard, not really something that Shadow wants too much. Leech is fine, right? But it's not something we're like trying to stack. But there are a lot of healers that really like Leech, and like Holy and Disc, Leech is really good for. So if you plan on playing of off-specking Holy or Disc, or maybe Shadow's your off-spec, right? If that's the case, then this is probably one that you do want to go for, because Leech is really good for healers. So not much to say about this one. It's just Leech, and Leech is not super great for Shadow. So again, not one that you're going to be focusing. Okay, then moving on. So that's all the blood shards. Now we're to the frost shards. The first frost shard is called the Shard of Core. This one is very similar to First Strike from Karain. So your damage is increased by 3% for 20 seconds after attacking an enemy you have not yet damaged. And this one sounds like it's going to be more similar to First Strike, where there's a bunch of enemies. Let's say you hit one of them and your damage to all of them is increased by 3%. The wording is very similar to the Blood offensive shard, the Shard of Beck, right? But for some reason, this one seems way more similar to First Strike than the Shard of Beck. Just because the Shard of Beck mentions your specific target, and this one just mentions any enemy that you hit, right? This one, I'll say, looks really, really good. If you're on a single target boss, this is not going to be good at all. You're going to have pretty much no uptime because you're going to hit it once. You'll get uptime for the first 20 seconds and then never again, right? Because you're just hitting the one guy. But on any fight that has more than one guy, which is a decent amount of the fights in the new raid, Sanctum of Domination, like Kel'Thuzad, this would be super sweet because there's constantly new ads that you haven't damaged yet. So this is definitely one that I would be trying to get pretty actively. This might even be the first shard that I try to get, right? So the damage increase up to 4.5% at rank 5, that's really big. It's bigger than the Shard of Beck. Even at rank 1, it's more of a damage increase than the Shard of Beck. So this one is, just straight up more damage, right? So I would definitely be trying to get this one. And then, so this one's going to be really good on fights with ads, right? But it's also going to be really, really good in Mythic Plus. So, just like Karain is really good in Mythic Plus, First Strike you get a lot of uptime on because there's constantly new stuff, new enemies. This one you're going to have a lot of uptime on as well because you're going to be constantly pulling new packs, right? So you could just have a constant increase of 4.5% of your damage, right? Which would be awesome. So, if you're Mythic Plus focused, definitely go for this one. And even if you're raid focused, I would say this one is a good one to pick up for sure. Like I said, it might be the first one I go for. But there's still a bunch of stuff up in the air. So the next one is the Healing Frost Shard, which is called the Shard of Tel. Your critical heals cause their target to absorb the next X amount of damage dealt to them within 6 seconds. This one is not something that you're probably ever going to use as Shadow, but it is something that you would probably use as Holy and maybe as Disc. So, depending on if this one procs with Hots, heal over time, this could be really, really good for Holy because Holy has a decent amount of Hots, right? But for Shadow specifically, like the only time I can think of that this might be good is like there's a pull, like maybe this is your 5th shard that you add just because you needed a 5th, and there's a pull where Vampiric Embrace is really important in Mythic Plus. You're running Sand Lane for it too. I would imagine that your critical heals from Vampiric Embrace would leave this Absorb Shield on people. But as it stands right now, this is not one I'm going to be going for. Mostly because I'm not going to worry about off-speccing one of the healing specs. If you are going to off-spec as Disc or Holy and you plan on having that just as geared as your Shadow gear set or whatever, then I would go for this one. This one's pretty good, especially if you crit a lot and especially if you have a lot of Hots. Now, I will say it's unclear whether or not Hots will, like a crit from a Hot will proc this. So take it with a grain of salt, right? But if that ends up being the case, this will be pretty strong. Like Resto Druids would love this, right? So that's the Shard of Tel. Next, we'll move on to the defensive shard from Frost, which is the Shard of Kier. While standing still, you gain an Absorb Shield every 5 seconds that ramps up to a cap of however big, right? So right now, these numbers are not insane, right? Because we're a caster, we do stand still pretty often. But it doesn't tick very frequently, right? It's only every 5 seconds. And if you have to be standing still for the whole 5 seconds to get one tick of this, then that would be really bad because it would limit our movement availability, right? And these absorb caps aren't very big. So I'm not positive what kinds of classes would like this, but as a Shadow Priest, maybe, like I said, maybe this would be an okay 4th or 5th shard, because, maybe you've got all the damage ones you want, and you just need to fill out the rest of your set bonus or something. Then maybe this one would be okay. But like I said, you don't stand still for very long, usually. In Mythic Plus, you're running around all the time, and in Raid, you're typically moving for mechanics pretty often. But Absorb Shields are nice, so it makes us, more tanky. So this is one that, if you pick it up passively, great. Don't go out and farm it. Okay, and then we're moving on to the Unholy Shards. The first one is the Offensive Shard. It's called the Shard of Diz. Damaging a target increases your damage done to that target by some percentage for 4 seconds, stacking up to 3 times, right? So this one is kind of interesting because if it refreshes every time you damage the target, and so you could have a 100% uptime as long as you hit the target within, there's no window where you don't hit the target for more than 4 seconds, right? Then this is just a straight up damage increase, right? Because let's say you're pulling the Terragru, the very first boss in the new raid. That's completely single target. You're only ever going to hit that guy, right? And you are constantly hitting that guy, right? Then let's say at the 5th rank of this, you get 1.5% increased damage done to that target. Do you just get that forever, right? Or will it only stack up to 3 times, and then you can't get any more stacks, and it falls off, and then you restart back at 1, right? And is there some kind of internal cooldown on this? Like, you can only get this every 30 seconds or something? Depending on the answers to those questions, this one may just be a completely passive 1.5% increase to your damage, right? Which would be really, really nice. Or it may be not very good at all, right? Because if it only happens like every 30 seconds or something, right? Then that's not... You get 4 seconds of 1.2% increased damage or something, right? That's not very big. So I imagine that this will have no internal cooldown, and you'll be able to have 3 stacks of it for pretty much an entire single target fight, in which case this is a nice shard, right? As far as... You're going to want pretty much all of these offensive shards, but the ones I would go for first are the Frost Shard, and then probably the Unholy Shard, and then depending on how the Blood Shard works, I would go for that one. So you'd go for the Shard of Core, and then the Shard of Diz, and then the Shard of Beck, right? And then after that, you can start looking at, maybe go for the defensive Frost Shard and the healing Blood Shard or something, right? To fill out your last 2 slots. But we still have to look at the healing and tertiary shard for Unholy. So yeah, this offensive one, the Shard of Diz, or Diz, not bad, but again, it's not very, very obvious, whether it's going to be good or not. So because it's a damage increase, it's one that I would actively be farming, right? Okay, so the next Unholy Shard is called the Shard of Zed. Your helpful spells and abilities have a chance to grant your target an unholy aura, draining 221 health from nearby enemies every 2 seconds for 10 seconds. So this one could be really nice, but it also leaves a lot of stuff pretty vague, right? So, for instance, what is a helpful spell, right? If I cast Power Word Shield on somebody, I imagine that's a helpful spell, right? But if I cast, let's say, Levitate, right, on somebody, is that a helpful spell? Or what about Fey Guardians? Do all of those count as helpful spells? That kind of thing. So, depending on what counts as a helpful spell or not, again, this is probably one of your 4th or 5th things that you'd be going for, not one of your main 3. And then depending on, does it drain that much health from, is that the cap of the health it drains from nearby enemies? It can drain 221 health from everything nearby, So if there are 5 targets nearby, does it draw 221 health from each of them? So effectively 1,100 health? Or does it only draw up to 221 health, split between them evenly? So this could be pretty strong in like Mythic Plus. You toss out a Power Word Shield on your tank every so often, and it lets him drain health like crazy from nearby enemies. And especially if you're going to play a healer, this would be really, really nice, because pretty much all of the healing spells are helpful spells, I would imagine. So again, if you're going to play Disc or Holy, this is probably one that you would want to get, especially if you want to do Mythic Plus. On a single target encounter, this would be very, very minimum. But then again, depending on how much it procs, it's just passive healing, that kind of thing. So yeah, like I was saying, probably a 4th or 5th choice as a Shadow Priest. And then this last one is really interesting. It's called the Shard of Oath, or Oath, and your speed is increased by 0. So obviously 0 is not going to be the final number there, or else why would they ever make this shard, right? So speed is a hidden but overpowered thing. So, well, not overpowered, it's undervalued is what I mean to say. People don't give it as much credit as they should. So, what speed does is it lets you stand still longer. So if you're in a raid encounter and there's some mechanic where you have to soak something 50 yards away, right? So it's really far. If your movement speed is really slow, then to get there in time, you have to start running a lot earlier than if your movement speed is really high, right? If you've got like a really high movement speed, you can just wait, cast. Somebody else with slow movement speed runs to get over there, and then you can keep casting, and then you could run over later and still make it in time, right? So having passive speed like this is actually pretty good. Like I would say this is almost certainly a 4th gem that I'm going to pick up rather than a 5th, right? Because speed is just really nice. There are several rooms in the new raid, like the room for the 9, the room for Sylvanas, where and even on Painsmith, all of those rooms are like really big, and so having speed there is going to be helpful if you have to run really far, which you most certainly will. Especially on Sylvanas, if it stays the way it is now. P2 of Sylvanas, spoiler alert. P2 of Sylvanas, you're going to be running for a really long time, so having higher speed is going to be helpful for that. So yeah, I think a lot of people would see this and be like, oh, it's just speed, nobody cares. But honestly, I think this is a really good one. I would say this is probably better than the Leech one even, if you're a Shadow Priest specifically. Just because it lets you stand still longer and cast, whereas instead of, having to run earlier. So, okay, so that's all of the different shards and what they do. So a quick recap real quick. There are 3 offensive shards that increase your damage. I would try to get all 3 of them as soon as possible, with your main focus being on the Frost Shard, the Shard of Core. Depending on where all this stuff drops from, it may be hard, it may be easy. If it's easy, then, good for you. Get whatever shard you want, really. If it's hard, then it's important that you focus the good ones first, right? So Shard of Core first, and then I would probably get the Shard of Diz second, the Unholy shard, and then I would go for the Shard of Beck third. Now, depending on a couple of things, and as we get closer to the patch, things might change, but almost certainly the Frost Shard is going to be the best. And then, from there, the other 2 shards are going to be good, almost certainly. And then after that, you've got 2 more slots that you can put a shard into, right? Because you can have up to 5 at the same time. And in that case, my 4th that I would go for, that I plan on going for probably, is the and this depends on the set bonuses, right? If you have to use specific types of shards for the set bonus, it's going to be a little bit different. But just looking at these shards without any kind of set bonus thing, the 4th one I would go for is the Speed Shard, the Shard of Oath, or Oth, or whatever. the Unholy Tertiary Shard. And then the fifth one I would go for is probably the Shard of Jas, or Jazz, or Joss, or whatever. The healing shard from Blood, where you get an increased incoming healing. So those are the 5 that I would go for without looking at any of the set bonuses. So now let's look at the set bonuses and see how this would actually change the last 2 shards that you go for, because it's almost certain that you're going to want to go for the 3 damage shards as a DPS dealer, Shadow Priest, right? But the last 2 you go for might change depending on if the set bonus is really good or not. Okay, so the Blood set bonus, this is what you get these when you equip all 3 shards of a certain type, right? So if you equip all 3 Blood shards, you get this set bonus. If you equip all 3 Frost shards, you get a different set bonus. If you equip all 3 Unholy shards, you get a different set bonus. So the Blood bonus is called Blood Link. While inside the Maw or Torghast, damaging an enemy establishes a Blood Link. The Blood Link pulses every 3 seconds, dealing some amount of shadow damage and healing you for 100% of that damage. If your Blood Link would overheal you, it instead heals a nearby ally. Limit 1, right? So if you're fighting 5 different things, you can only ever have the 1 Blood Link, right? So this one could actually be really good. And I will mention, all 3 of these have that phrase at the beginning, while inside the Maw or Torghast. And the new raid counts as inside the Maw. So Sanctum of Domination is located, I think it's in Korthia, or it's at the top of the chains. Yeah, and I think the chains are pulling Korthia down. So it's in the Maw. Yeah, so that's where, while inside the Maw or Torghast, it's saying it also works in open world content in the Maw, and it also works in Torghast, but mostly the most important one is that it does work in the raid. So it won't work in like Ouroboros or any of the 4 Maldraxxus or Revendreth or anything like that, but it will work in the raid. So this Blood one, if this shadow damage number that says 0 right now, if that is something like 5k, that'd be pretty good, right? Every 3 seconds, 5k damage, that's like 1 2/3, so 1,666 DPS. So that's really good, right? So if this were to do like 5,000 shadow damage, this is a pretty strong one, right? And it heals you for all of that damage. So this could be really good. And it's a smart heal, so if you're at 100% health, it'll heal a nearby ally. Now, I don't know if like, let's say you're standing there with 2 other people, and you're at 100% health, and one of them is at 100% health, and the third guy's at 50% health, and this procs, and it would overheal you, and then it chooses one of the other 2. Let's say it chooses the guy who has 100% health. Is it smart enough to know that it would overheal them as well, and it heals somebody else? I would imagine the answer is no, right? So I'd imagine if it would overheal you, it just randomly heals somebody else. So I don't think you could like have 19 people at 100% HP all running this thing and just spam healing a tank or something like that. But I do think this would be pretty strong, and it depending on the shadow damage number, right? So if it's something really small, probably not great, but if it's something really, really big, then, it might be really nice. Okay, then we've got the Frost 3-set bonus. So if you're using all 3 Frost shards, you get this bonus. It's called Winds of Winter. While inside the Maw or Torghast, each time you deal a critical strike, the winds accumulate 6% of that effect, up to a cap of however much per critical strike. And then every 20 seconds, the winds unleash, dealing frost damage equal to the total accumulation and surrounding you in the winds for 20 seconds, absorbing 100% of the damage dealt by the winds. Okay, so this one has potential to be super overpowered, but it also has potential to just be pretty good, right? So depending on how big this cap is, right, up to a cap of 0 per critical strike. If that's something like 5,000, then this could be really, really strong. Because if you're critting like crazy, and you get up to 5,000 damage for every single crit that you have, that would be a lot of damage after 20 seconds, right? But if it's something really small, like 200 or 100 or something, then this might not be super strong. But the real question about whether this is going to be OP or not is if where it says every 20 seconds the winds unleash, dealing frost damage equal to the total accumulation. Does that mean if you're fighting 5 targets and it's accumulated 10,000 damage, it'll do 2,000 to all 5 targets? Or will it do 10,000 to all 5 targets, right? If it's the first one, then this is pretty good, but gets worse the more targets you add, right? And if it's the second one, then it's crazy good, and it gets better the more targets you add, right? Especially as a dot class like a Shadow Priest, or something that likes to hit a lot of targets, right? This could be super crazy if it hits every target for the max damage. So this is probably looking like the one that I'm gonna go for. Although the Unholy one also looks pretty good, so we'll look at that one next. But the Absorb Shield from this one is really strong. It has an Absorb Shield for 20 seconds, so that's basically 100% uptime, right? Because it triggers every 20 seconds and you get a shield for 20 seconds. So the first one triggers and you have a shield until the next one, and then you get another shield, right? So this would be a lot like the Azerite power in BFA that just passively gave you a shield, which is nice, right? And also Shadow Priest, the way it is currently, we have moments where we crit a lot, right? So like when we're playing, when we've got Solete Ruby and we've got the Kabbalist Simnel, our crit can get really high at times, and we can crit pretty often. So this could be pretty good. And in Mythic Plus, especially with like Searing Nightmare spam or with Ancient Madness, right, where you get 30% increased crit after you first enter Void Form, this could be really, really good. So it's likely that I'll either go for this Frost one or the Unholy one. So then let's talk about the Unholy one. This one's called Chaos Bane. While inside the Maw or Torghast, your spells and abilities have a chance to drain a soul fragment from your target, granting you 10 primary stat for 30 seconds, and stacking up to 15 times. When you reach 15 stacks, unleash Chaos Bane, dealing however much shadow damage, split between nearby enemies, and granting you 300 primary stat for 15 seconds. Okay, and this one scales off of your haste. It's got a little thing down there that says it scales off of your haste, right? PPM stands for procs per minute. I'm not sure what the R stands for. So RPPM, I think it's I'm not sure. It's like random or something, but I'm not positive on that. But if it's 8 procs per minute, that's pretty good, right? That's like more than once every 10 seconds, so not too bad. And this would give you up to 150 intellect, and then after you hit 15 stacks, it explodes, right? And you get 300 intellect. So intellect right now, as I'm making this video, is my best stat by far, and I'm pretty close to best in slot, right? So it's looking like if the stat weights stay the way they are now as we go into the new patch, and intellect is still our best, this could be really, really strong. And as we get more and more haste, right, like I'm at 32% haste almost, then, these proc rates will just go up, and maybe you get 15 stacks pretty often, right? And plus, because it scales off your haste during Lust, this will stack really quickly, right? The real kicker is going to be this dealing shadow damage number. If this number is really high, right, this could be really good. If it's really low, it's not going to be so good. The thing I will mention, though, is in the tooltip for the Unholy one, it says dealing however much shadow damage split between nearby enemies, And in the Frost set bonus, it just says dealing damage equal to the total accumulation. So it doesn't say if it's split between enemies, or if it's an area around you, or if it just hits everything, right? Everything you're in combat with. But these two, the Frost and Unholy set bonuses, are definitely a lot more alluring than the Blood one. Although the Blood one might be one that you use on like a boss that people are dying like crazy, you know, because it helps heal everybody. So it might be a good prog thing to have, but it's more likely that damage is going to be more important, in which case the Unholy one and the Frost one both look really good. I will say that the Unholy one fits better with our stats right now. Like, we like haste, and this one scales off haste, so it's likely that we'll be trying to get a lot of haste in the coming patch. So this one's looking pretty good, and intellect is our best stat right now. So this would be really good. It's just that the Winds of Winter one has potential to be like super OP. So now that we've seen the set bonuses, I'll give kind of a concluding thoughts, right? I'm still going to go for the 3 damage dealing shards. So I'm going to go for the Shard of Tel, and then I'm going to get the Shard of Diz, and then I'm going to get the Shard of Beck, right? So, oh, not the Shard of Tel, I mean the Shard of Core. So the Frost damage shard, the Shard of Core, is going to be my first shard I go for, and then I'm going to go for the Unholy Shard, Shard of Diz, and then I'm going to go for the Blood Shard, Shard of Beck, right? Once I've got those 3, right now my plan is to go for the Unholy set bonus, right? Because you get the Speed Shard, and you get the Shard of Zed, which your helpful spells and abilities have a chance to do the Unholy Aura thing. That one doesn't really matter, but the Speed Shard is really nice. So you get 2 nice ones from Unholy, and you get the other 2 offensive shards from Frost and Blood, right? So that's what I'm going to be going for. But again, there's still a bunch of time before the patch. Things will most certainly change. So keep an eye on things. And like I said, I will try to post a new video as we get closer, if they say more stuff about this, and things change pretty drastically. But as of right now, the plan is go for the 3 offensive shards, and then go for the 2 other Unholy shards, so that you're using 3 Unholy shards, and then the Blood and the Frost offensive shards to get the Unholy set bonus. So that's it for the talk about the Shards of Domination. Hopefully this hasn't dragged on too long, and you guys have learned something useful. I wish everybody best of luck coming into 9.1. Can't wait to, have a new raid finally. Let me know if you guys enjoyed this kind of video, or if you would rather I talk about something else, or just shut up entirely. Yeah, like always, feel free to leave a like, subscribe, join my Discord server if you want to chat, leave a comment, all that stuff that YouTube likes, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.